Right, okay, so I think I'm going to get started. This is a packed room, colleagues, it really is, so thank you so much for choosing me over much more interesting people, I'm sure, who are down the corridor. So I'm Haili Hughes. It says I'm the head of education. I'm not actually, I'm the director of education, so look at that. I've worked at Iris Connect for 2.5 years. I left the classroom in a similar kind of situation to what Sam Gibbs was telling us, really, English teacher like Sam as well, lots in common, in August of 2021. Just after COVID, when I was feeling a little bit stifled, I would say, and kind of bored of the professional development opportunities that were available to me as an experienced classroom teacher. I'd been in the classroom for 16 years by that point, who didn't necessarily want to make that leap at that point again to senior leadership. I had been a senior leader prior to that, and in a special measures school, really tough environment, and had decided actually that it had taken me away from the thing that I loved, which was my classroom teaching and the love of my subject, English. So probably suffered a little bit from some of the stuff that Andy was talking about and some of that stuff from that Craft and Pape study that, you know, really looked at those mid-career teachers, and a lot of the CPD that I was sitting through, really, to quote the Smiths and Morrissey, said nothing to me about my life, really. You know, I had constant kind of 2-hour sessions in halls, sat there with some expert in a cape like me now, going into schools and telling me that I've been doing it all wrong. And a lot of the stuff that I was listening to, there was no implementation after that, there was no follow-up, and that's why I am a big advocate for coaching. And like the two speakers that we've heard of from today already, I have some concerns about some of the direction of coaching that we're seeing in schools at the moment. I think share some of Sam's concerns about kind of everybody just becoming coaches overnight with very little training. You know, buying a platform doesn't necessarily make you a trained coach. And I say that for our platform as well as anybody else's. So, you know, it's an important implementation process to implement coaching and a culture of coaching into a school, and it takes time. It's not something that we can do overnight. So I have some concerns, but I still believe very inherently in the power of coaching, and in particular this idea of instructional coaching. So some of you may have seen my book Mentoring in Schools, which is probably the book that sold the most copies. And in that book, I advocate very much for, you know, I absolutely, without shame, that book is about improving teaching. It's not about the kind of counselling form of coaching or mentoring that we sometimes see in schools. It is absolutely a forensic effort at coaches helping people improve their pedagogy and their instruction and how to get better. And that for me is what instruction is all about, instructional coaching. But how do we, you know, get that adaptivity, which Andy talked about, which is just so important. So my clicker isn't working, so I'm going to pop behind here. So we've only so far in a couple of hours had one Dylan William quote, and I couldn't continue much longer without having another. I don't think I've delivered about 400 CPD sessions in the last 2.5 years. I'm really 21, and it's aged me a lot. I don't think I ever do a CPD session without quoting Dylan William, and I think this is probably one of his most quoted phrases. I'm not going to read it out to you. You can have a look at it yourself. But it's this idea actually that, you know, we can recruit all of the new teachers into the profession that we like. Obviously recruitment is a massive issue in terms of succession planning, in terms of having those teachers in front of our students that they deserve. But actually there are rafts and rafts of experienced teachers leaving the profession. And I'm one of them. Sam's one of them. Sarah is one of them. In fact, we're all English teachers, so I don't know what that tells you. You know, we need to love the one we're with. As Dylan William talks about. You know, we need to invest in the professional development of the teachers that we have in our school, because our schools are full of talented, creative, reflective practitioners, and we need to help them to continue on their cycle of professional development where they're still updating their knowledge, their skills, their understanding to deliver those high quality lessons. And a great way to do that for me can be instructional coaching, but what is it? So is anybody on X here, or Twitter as we call it? Yes, okay. So you will, I mean, Twitter's just full of binaries, isn't it? You referred to it a little bit earlier on. Are you a trad? Are you a prog? Are you a zero tolerance or restorative? I mean, if only teaching was as easy as that, okay? It's not. It's so reductive. It's so binary. And there's been lots of, controversy over definitions of what instructional coaching is over the last couple of years on Twitter. The reason probably why it's come into so much fruition and been so popular in schools is probably that Kraft, Lazar and Hogan study from 2018 that claimed that instructional coaching is one of the most highly effective forms of CPD, and to improve teaching that we currently have in education, it's a really good bet for us to look at in terms of professional development in schools. And as Rob Coe and many others have asserted, if the quality of teaching is going to be the thing that in schools makes the biggest difference, then actually instructional coaching, it's a no-brainer, isn't it, really? And Dylan William talks about, if you get one of a really great teacher, kids in their class will learn, I think he says like a whole year better, learning more impacts than teachers who are less effective. So making sure there's a high standard of teaching in every single classroom, it takes balance. There's a balance that needs to be struck between consistency, which is a theme that's come up quite a lot this morning, in certain aspects of teaching, in order to maintain that level of kind of quality across the system. But actually there's that autonomy as well, allowing teachers to still be themselves. And that's what I worry about a little bit with this codification of teaching, this tick box of strategies. I work in ITT. Some of you may know, alongside my role at Iris Connect, I'm a principal lecturer in mentoring and professional development at the University of Sunderland. So essentially it's my job to look after 1,200 mentors. That's a huge, huge job. And we've worked really hard over the last few years to get consistency in our approach in mentoring, but not to be too didactic and too controlling. And that's a really, really difficult balance to strike. Instructional coaching, if done really, really well, gives you an opportunity to do that. And it's not just me kind of stood here saying how great this is. Very recently, last year, Iris Connect were involved in a study with Mathematica Policy Institute, which is a huge organisation in the United States, where they did an investigation of video coaching using our platform. And they found that 5 cycles of video-based coaching enabled by us at Iris Connect and Teachstone, which is a big education company in the US, improve student achievement by an additional 2+ months. So it's not just me kind of stood here to you saying, instructional coaching is great, guys, it really works. Statistically, this huge, big study that we did in the States with nearly 1,000 teachers has proved actually that it also has a massive impact on pupil outcomes as well. So coaching's not a new thing in education. There are many of us sat in this room who've seen coaching come and go 4 or 5 times over our career, called different things. So, instructional coaching is fairly recent for us here, but it's been going on since the late 80s. In America, it was actually Jim Knight, and I was really privileged to be at his conference in October in Orlando. It's Jim Knight, actually, who invented the term instructional coaching, but maybe some of the forms of coaching that we're doing here in England at the moment differ quite a lot from his vision of what instructional coaching is. But largely, coaching tends to follow this model. So you'd start off with some kind of observation of practice. It used to be a whole lesson that a coach or a mentor would stay for now. People like Paul Bambrick-Santoyo, who Andy had on the screen this morning, who's a big thinker in teacher development in the US, have now advocated staying in for what he calls the waterfall moment. So you would only stay for a specific part of a lesson that dealt with a strategy that you're trying to improve. So it's much more granular. But it starts with some kind of observation. That might be an observation of lessons, collection of data, something like that. There's that element of sharing feedback. If you're doing it on our platform, which I'll talk about a bit later on, that might look like the time-linked comments that you use, or now we've introduced media comments as well that are really great as well. So there's that preparation and the sharing of feedback where the school leader or the coach or whoever's coaching you will give you that feedback, and that might be co-constructed, it might be coach-led, dependent on kind of domain expertise. And then there's that area of development that comes from this. So what is your learning goal? What are you going to try and improve? And then how are you going to do that? And it's the mechanisms that you use after that as an instructional coach, I think, which are really, really key. So we've tried to think about instructional coaching at Iris Connect in a slightly different way to what we think any other platform is thinking about it. And this has taken quite a lot of thought and research. And, you know, I don't think any of us as teachers has sat through CPD over the last 3 or 4 years without being given some CPD on cognitive load theory. You know, I think we're all pretty much experts now in working memory, long-term memory, schemas, mental models, and how that can impact on our instructional design as teachers. When I trained to teach in the early 2000s, this was psychology. We absolutely did not talk about stuff like this. And I think, you know, my teaching practice massively improved because of being aware of the science of learning. But what we don't often see is actually that people who are delivering CPD or designing coaching programs or platforms are all thinking about cognitive load as well and the way that people learn. So, you know, as a teacher, we wouldn't, for example, bombard some of our novice learners with an hour of us just speaking at the front of the room without giving them that time to actually link it to prior knowledge or practice some of the skills that we're asking them to do. We see that in CPD all the time, or with coaching. And what we've ended up with, I'm afraid, because of some of the complexities that Andy and Sam talked about this morning, is that unfortunately we're now seeing like a one-size-fits-all model of instructional coaching, like a tick list essentially of have you done this, have you done this, have you done this, and it's not taking notice of any prior experience of coaches, any prior domain expertise, any prior learning that they've done, and actually it's not adapting to meet them where they are. So we know that if somebody who's more novice in terms of their domain expertise probably needs more support in terms of the coach being more directive, more modelling, more deliberate practice, maybe out of context practice before they, you know, free up the cognitive load to go into a lesson and do it, more gradual release. So I do, we do, you do, more deconstruction, more thinking out loud. As somebody gains those domain expertise and is more at the facilitative end of coaching, if we continue to treat that experienced teacher in the same way as we might treat an ECT or a trainee teacher, what we're going to see is what Carl Hughes talks about, which is expertise reversal effect. And we know this because we've all learnt about it for our students, but when it comes to like professional development of staff, we don't seem to take it on board as much. And that's what we've tried to do. We've essentially tried to build 3 coaching pathways that Andy talked about earlier that lie along this domain expertise frame. And have any of you read David Weston and Bridget Clay's book on what makes great teaching, I think it's called? Yes. Unleashing Great Teaching. Absolutely awesome book. And we've basically based all of our kind of coaching pathways around a quotation that they use in the book, and I'm going to say it to you now, which is that no teacher is a novice or an expert in every domain. So basically, whichever teacher you are working with, whether that is an ECT, whether it's somebody who's been teaching for 25 years, they will always have something to learn in every single domain of pedagogy or instruction. So what will happen is that you will probably, in your year of working with a teacher, undulate between each of these different types of coaching. A classic example is that I am probably a little bit terrifying to children, so I never had any problem with behaviour management. However, my questioning, they never let me near year 7 and 8s ever. So I was always like year 10, year 11, and then when year 7s did come in, I'd be like, hi guys, and all my year 11s would be like, why are you being nice? And I'm like, shut up. So, you know, we all have areas of expertise essentially that we need to develop. So, you know, my questioning might have been something that I was working with somebody in a more directive way. If it was behaviour management, I might be having a co-constructed coaching conversation about, you know, things that hadn't worked for me and using, you know, collaborative efforts with a colleague for things that might have worked for them and discussing that. So we'll all kind of lie across that spectrum in different domains all of the time. And that's why it's really important that we've got these 3 types of pathways available. So if for those of you who are, you know, love coaching and geek out about it as much as I do, the directive is more like a kind of Paul Bambrick-Santoyo model, sort of thing that you might see with possibly Step Lab or Ambition Institute. It's very granular. It's looking at steps of teaching. The dialogical is more along the Jim Knight spectrum, so it's two coach and a teacher working in partnership to transform one another's practice. And then the facilitative is much more like an action research almost, so it's like educative mentoring, if any of you have come across that. So it's basically looking at discussing things, trialing things in your classroom to transform one another's practice. So there's going to be times when you will use all of these with even the same teacher. So what might happen in all of these is, I don't know what's happened there. What might happen in all of these is that you will use the same kind of mechanisms, and I'll talk about that in just a second, but the way that you use those mechanisms will probably be different. But whichever of those that you do, there are kind of three main principles for instructional coaching. So the first principle is that basically it's about instruction, it's about teaching and learning. And Andy talked about some of the misconceptions of instruction, meaning that you're telling somebody what to do. That's not what it means at all. Instruction just means teaching and pedagogy. So it's always, instructional coaching got to be focused solely on teaching and learning and the improvement of that. So it's got to be focused on the next steps that the teacher's going to take to be able to improve what they do in the classroom. So the aim of it is essentially that little by little, term after term, cycle after cycle of development, those teachers are getting just that little bit better, okay, in a granular fashion, and forming much more effective habits because of it. So that results then in every single teacher getting better at their own pace and in their own stage of development. And that hopefully then helps them to overcome that plateau that Kraft and Pape talked about, that we've seen a couple of times today already. It shouldn't be used as standalone CPD as well. If any of you follow Tom Sherrington and read his Teacher Head blog, he blogged about this recently. Instructional coaching is not like a silver bullet. Actually, it should sit within a matrix of other opportunities for staff to improve on what they do. And Tom Sherrington has provided a thinking tool for developing teaching by looking at it through the lens of a whole school, a team and an individual teacher development as well. So instructional coaching is part of a big jigsaw. I've been into some schools where they've been like, we do instructional coaching, and that's not in the spirit of what instructional coaching is about. So by seeing CPD in that way, actually, we can make sure that whole school development priorities are cascaded down into team development, and having kind of that instructional coaching across the school ensures that everyone's developmental needs are met. If instructional coaching doesn't sit within a system like that, it actually has the potential to lose focus and become lethally mutated, and it's just there and not really making an impact. It's ticking a box, we're doing it. And then the final principle of any kind of instructional coaching is that the leaders of teaching who want to use instructional coaching have to find a system that's balanced for both the coach and coachee. And that's something that Jim Knight talks very much about, this dialogic approach, and that is one that in essence actually is about supporting teachers to meaningfully discuss what they do in the classroom every single day and consider the tangible next steps for how they can improve. And what we're going to look at is kind of now for the rest of this session, actually, how, if we are implementing instructional coaching in our school, if we've already done it, if we are instructional coaches, what can we do? What are the ways that we can really turbocharge professional development in our school and help teachers develop their practice? What I call the mechanisms, if you like, of instructional coaching, nicking that phrase from Sam Sims and his colleagues at the EF. So I think it's always useful, before we kind of start looking at the nitty gritty and the mechanisms, to actually think about what great instructional coaching looks like. And apologies for any of you who either work for Ambition Institute, sorry Sarah, because you'll have seen this a million times, or are a Teach First mentor. Is anyone a Teach First mentor here? No? Oh, we're all right. Yes, I shouldn't have said it. I should have took credit for it. But they use this video all the time, but it's such an excellent video that what I'm going to ask you to do is watch it. This is Yo-Yo Ma. And what I want you to think about is, how does Yo-Yo make it really easy to implement his feedback, okay, and ensures that his feedback immediately changes how these musicians play the piece. So this is basically a really great example of what instructional coaching might look like using music. So I'm just going to duplicate, because I don't know whether anyone's noticed, but the Wi-Fi is really terrible here, so I had to buffer this morning.
Who wants fire will give him fire, all right? Okay, so 3, 4. So, listen, we were talking yesterday. You do something with me. Do that. Just. Yeah. Can you make it sound like machine gun fire? Almost ugly and play close to the bridge. Bouncer. Yes. Yeah, that's good. Good. Don't worry about the notes. We're not here to, play perfectly, just to get character, okay? Jennifer, you know what I feel when you go? I don't feel that actually the rest is actually a slap in the face. It's like you want to go on and then something goes bang, down, bum. Ba 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 da. What I hear from you, you go da 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 da. Well, sounds like a nice phrase.
I allow it to
right? Okay, so go ahead. Bum, bum. Good. Wait, and then same thing. Bum, bum.
Yeah.
Right? All the way to the end. So let's try 33 again. Really don't give up. All right? 3, 4. Good. Kari, it's fabulous. But you know what? You play it one more time.
Right.
You're giving it away.
Okay.
You're making it explode too soon. So suppress it. All of that great thing, just put a lid over it. Don't take away any of the energy, but just put a lid over it. Let's try it again. All right?
Gotcha.
3, 4. Yes. Do you hear it? Sounds better, huh?
Okay, so I think you get the gist. I mean, I'm really hopeless at music, so all of them sounded really good to me, to be honest. But that's why it's really important, isn't it, that actually our coaches are domain experts. They can diagnose, and please don't look at my desktop, how bad is that? Oh, my word. Yes, so that's why it's really, really important that actually our coaches are those domain experts and they can recognise what the active ingredients of great teaching might be. So, on your tables, couple of minutes. What's that got to do with instructional coaching? How did he make it easy to implement his feedback? How did he ensure that his feedback immediately changed how they played the piece? Okay, 2 or 3 minutes on your tables.
I'm windy.
It's all. Well, I couldn't either. So yeah, it's almost a shame to interrupt you because I loved some of the conversations that I was hearing. Then this is why this video, I think, if you're leading CPD in a school or are trying to implement coaching, showing this video to staff to try and actually articulate, actually this is what great coaching looks like, is so powerful. I use it in almost every CPD across the world that I do on coaching and mentoring because it's just so powerful. Sam told me about another video. What is it that you've got as well? Because I'm going to have a look at that.
Coaching.
Car coaching.
Yeah, so it's like the James Corden thing.
Yes.
Coach.
Oh wow.
So she's the best one. I'll send it you. She's getting us to sing an Adele song, but it's a kind of similar thing.
Yes.
But I guess there's a bigger emphasis maybe on the relationships to the
Yes.
young girl.
Yeah.
And she gets to
Yeah.
talk about what she
Yeah.
wants to sing the song. And,
Yeah,
the skills are the same.
you'll have to share the video with me definitely because I'm always looking for other examples from my repertoire. So that's great. So I heard some really interesting conversations going on this table. Does anybody want to feedback about what's that got to do with coaching and what was Yo-Yo Ma doing that was so impressive?
So I don't mind summarising, yeah. So I think that across everybody we picked out some pieces around how small the pieces were, how the culture had been set up in order that he could be super direct and directive, and that he was willing to play those things, model them, but also from a vulnerability perspective, like he made it less important, like you said, it doesn't matter what notes they are, like with practicing, and then the explanation of what the impact of doing it that way. So you've got the buy-in, people know why they're doing them.
Mm-hmm. And what did he do? What did he keep doing? Modelling it himself, every single time. So, sometimes, and teaching can be such kind of, there's lots of debate out there about whether teaching is a science or an art. I don't think it's either. I think it's somewhere in the muddy middle there. And, there's lots of kind of debate as well about whether we can, codify teaching, and I think to an extent we can, because we know what active ingredients might appear in certain strategies, but there's always going to be context, isn't there? And, what might work for, go to Dylan William again, he talks about not everything working everywhere, but everything working somewhere. And I think that's important to remember. And it kind of is in the spirit, really, with what our themes are today. But actually what he does is model it. It can be quite abstract if we just tell somebody, actually, I think you could have done that there. And that's why the power of modelling is just so important. And he gives them the opportunity to practice it as well with that immediate feedback, which I think is really, really important and key. So they change it kind of in the moment, don't they, almost, rather than going away and having to redo it in another lesson. And that's why I do think, you know, that out of context practice can be really effective. So where have we kind of, I've shown you our pathways, where have we got the mechanisms that we use in coaching from? Well, it's from this study, Sam Sims did. I know Andy talked about some of what he sees as kind of maybe the flaws in this study. I think this study was absolutely excellent way of getting us to think really deeply about professional development in schools in a way that we hadn't really done since about 2002 when Joyce and Showers did their seminal research on professional development as well. And Sims and the rest of his team talked about these mechanisms, he called them, that they found that the most effective programs of professional development had in them. And you've got these kind of 4 categories about building knowledge, motivating teachers, developing teaching techniques, and embedding practice. And what we've done essentially is adapted from each of those mechanism groups what we've seen in lots of study and getting out and observing coaches in hundreds of schools are the things that work really, really well in coaching relationships. And that's not to say again that this is a tick list and that if coaches are doing none of these, they're rubbish coaches. That's not what we're saying. But what we've identified are these kind of things, instructional coaching mechanisms that we find in a lot of instructional coaching interactions. So we've got things like providing feedback, setting goals, dialogue on observation with deconstruction and probing questions, modelling a technique, and then practice. And these coaching mechanisms form the backbone of each of our coaching pathways. But the way that they are done is different dependent on which coaching pathway it is. So if you're working with a trainee, for example, you know, you might be, the coach might be providing the feedback, providing the target, because the ECT or the trainee might not have the mental models to be able to realise. But I would always go in less directive and then get increasingly directive if they're not getting it. If you're working with somebody who's been, you know, has got quite fluid domain expertise, that might be them telling you what they need to improve and you enabling that through those probing questions and dialogue that you have. So how you do these things, these mechanisms, is going to be different based on kind of each pathway that you look at. So lots of people have asked me, well, you know, what does instructional coaching actually look like using Iris Connect's platform then? Well, for us, it's all about dialogue. And that's one of the kind of, you know, focuses of the conference today. So it would start off, we're going to follow it round like any good coaching cycle. It would start off with a teacher, whether that's a trainee, whether it's a senior leader or a head of department, filming their lesson, okay? And then they would decide whether they want to share the whole thing with you or just a snippet, all right? They might film it and go, oh my God, I'm not sharing this with anybody, and delete it. I've done that a few times, don't know about anybody else. But that's the power of Iris Connect, isn't it? That it's not taken out of your hands, it's you that decides who you share that with or not to share it at all. So it starts with that video. You would then share it with a coach or somebody working alongside you, a peer or a mentor, and they would provide time-linked comments, okay, or media comments on that video. You might reply to some of those media comments, you might get a dialogue going. Your dialogue could be online, you could meet afterwards and do it face-to-face as well. So then you'll decide, co-decide, or decide, the coach will decide or the teacher will decide what area of focus you are going to focus on, okay? And what will happen is then that they will come up with a specific target, and that will be linked to one of our theory groups. So we have an instructional palette, which Andy showed earlier, with 6 different theory groups on. I've based those on all the foundation concepts and the ECF standards. So whatever your target is, it's going to link to one of those instructional palette groups. And then you'll decide what pathway you want to follow, and the framework will take you through the next steps of the coaching interaction. So it's really, really simple and really, really easy. So an example of that might be that I might film my lesson, I might share it with my coach, and I might realise myself, and my coach might see as well, actually, that my expositions are really unclear. And that actually what I'm not doing is accounting for the cognitive load of my students or their prior learning. So we have that conversation. I'll then head to the instruction and scaffolding group in the instructional palette. I'll read the theory. I'll watch some of the models of practice, maybe deconstruct them and discuss them with my coach. And then I'll decide, actually, do you know what? I think I need some more directive help on this. So we'll do the more directive skills coaching pathway. Okay. And then, you know, round we go into the filming the lessons again and sharing it and following that framework. So that's kind of what it looks like. And as I said, all of those instructional coaching mechanisms are part of it. Now, one of the things that I think it can be the most difficult thing to do of these coaching mechanisms is the providing feedback. And when I know when I've worked with teachers before, it can be really frustrating when you give them some probing questions and say, you know, what did you think about this part of your lesson? And I think, by the way, one of the worst things we can say is, how do you think it went after a lesson? Because then what happens is everybody always does the same and goes, it went all right, and you never get anywhere with it. So as specific as you can be, you know, how do you think your challenge questions were during this, or how do you think the probing questions were, whatever the shared teaching and learning language that you use is. So providing feedback can be really frustrating because sometimes, you know, teachers are not going to where you want them to be despite all the probing questions. And, you know, Jim Knight talks about this and says that we shouldn't sit there and rub somebody's back for hours on end, and if they're not getting it, that's when we need to be more directive. Or sometimes, you know, we might be working with some oppositional staff, I've had that as well before, who do not agree with the feedback that you're giving them at all. It's a really, really challenging domain to work in. So I'm going to give you a chance to have a bit of a cathartic moan for a couple of minutes now before we look at what actually bad feedback looks like and what good feedback looks like and how we can do it with Iris and give you a go at giving some feedback based on a video. I'm going to give you a chance to discuss on your table what's the worst feedback that you've ever received, and I'm going to share mine and hopefully you can share some of yours in a second. A couple of minutes. Yeah. Okay. Has anyone got a particular rotter that they'd like to share? We love to moan as teachers. This is your opportunity. Has anyone got a particularly rotten one or ridiculous one? Go on.
Talking about generic types of feedback.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes it's like when we haven't done the strategy of the month. That's the way we're trying to see people. When you're talking about not being actually given the grade that you should be because you haven't used the cups all the way of the feedback.
So superficial, isn't it, honestly?
So kind of almost like that's a generic type of bad feedback, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was Josh Goodrich a few years ago, who's the MD of Step Lab, wrote a blog for Ambition Institute about, that kind of feedback. And I think he used the analogy of it's like telling a footballer to score more goals or a surgeon to save more lives. It's like, oh, really? You know, I know I've got to do that, but actually, can we be more granular? How do I do that? And especially when we're working with people who might be more novice in the role as well, telling them to improve their questioning, for example, is so vague and wide that, you know, they're left at a loss, aren't they? Anybody else? Yeah. Oh, sorry, go on.
We were discussing that the Iris is a great way to get rid of that disagreement about what has occurred.
Because it's there.
Because it can be subjective and it takes away that.
It does, because it's there in black and white, isn't it, almost, in the video. Yes. One more? Go on, you had your hand up.
Oh, yeah, sorry. About 20 years ago now when I first started, I was told to shout
It's
more.
cut deep though, hasn't it?
I was told to shout more at my students.
Oh, wow.
I didn't. That was like a behaviour management strategy at the time. To shout more. And I had a trainee literally this week that was raked over the coals. She was in tears because during a learning walk she was reprimanded for not having a teaching file on her desk and not having the books on the table, and for trying a new strategy during a learning walk that she should have kept for later. And I just was like...
And we wonder why people leave in the profession, guys. Yeah. Wow, okay. So should I share mine? It's ridiculous. So when I was a trainee, I'd had a really good first placement and an absolutely awesome, amazing mentor who struck the right balance of support and challenge, let me take risks like we're talking about there, but also was there as a kind of security blanket for me as well. And then my second school, I went to this school, and the head of English, I could tell, didn't like the cut of my jib as soon as she saw me. I kind of saw her go, like this because I don't look like most conventional English teachers, I guess, or certainly didn't sort of 17, 18 years ago. You know, hardly any teachers had tattoos or anything at that point. Now it's rare to find a teacher without one nowadays, but, you know, that was a big thing. I was kind of, you know, quite unusual. And I could tell she didn't like me. I had my first lesson. She was my mentor. Head of department, was retiring a couple of months later. And, you know, very experienced colleague. And she said at the end to me, how do you think that went? That classic question. And I said, well, it went all right. Exactly how I said I'd say it earlier. And then she went, well, I disagree. And I was like, okay. And she said, don't you ever, and I mean ever, call the ladies in this school guys. Because I said, okay, guys, pens down. It's an all-girls school. And I was like, okay. And she said, and I'll tell you now, she said, if you're going to be an English teacher, you need elocution lessons. So I was in Liverpool, by the way, guys. So, you know, it wasn't exactly Queen's English. And it was really just ignore my teams. That'll be somebody from the University of Sunderland. So, you know, trying to, you know, really kind of crush me, to be quite honest. And she said, you don't worry, she said, but with my help, I can help you become a perfectly adequate teacher. She said, because that's the best you've got to hope for. Yeah, she was a delight. Yeah.
Sent her copies of your books.
Well, I was going to say I've got my Viva in 7 weeks' time, so it will be Dr. Perfectly Adequate Teacher. Thank you very much in a couple of months. But you know, luckily people like Pat Stone are, you know, they're dinosaurs now. They're becoming extinct in the world of teaching. Thank goodness. But actually, you know, that feedback and goals, it's a dialogue piece. It should be co-constructed, and we need to think really, really carefully about how we deliver that. So what does bad feedback look like? You've picked up on loads of it. Leaving too long is a classic one, and that's where Iris gets rid of that as well. I don't know the amount of times when I've been observed by somebody and then they've not given me feedback for like 48 hours afterwards, and that's a problem because we lose touch of what actually happened in the lesson. We forget it. Even when we're in a lesson delivering it, the cognitive load is so high in a lesson that we don't see things the way that an observer would see it anyway, and video obviously gets rid of that. So you can give immediate almost feedback that same day using our time link comments, and now even quicker with video comments, so you just literally film yourself doing it. Lack of trust. So, you know, Sam mentioned earlier about senior leaders coming in and watching your lessons who don't teach your subject, and then some of the feedback that you get doesn't really apply because they don't understand the disciplinary, the substantive and you know, knowledge in your subject, the hinterland knowledge, for example, so we don't take it on board. No model or shared understanding actually of what excellence looks like, and again, this is something that we're working on really hard at Iris Connect in conjunction with Windsor Academy Trust. We've got some colleagues from WAT today who have made videos for us of excellent practice that we've got in a bank of resources and on our instructional palette that teachers can watch and have that model to kind of measure where they are and where they need to be. And then the other thing is too vague and wide, which some of you mentioned before. And again, video helps you get around that because it's linked to a concrete moment in the lesson. So it's really specific and granular and not establishing clear next steps. And again, that dialogue using the video can help you get around that as well. So Andy would probably disagree with me here, but I really love Paul Bambrick-Santoyo's model of coaching in his book, Get Better Faster. And this is something that Teach First use, and it's called the PEAS model, okay? So it stands for praise, probe, action step, practice, plan ahead, and follow up. And it's all around this idea of teachers being able to see it, name it, and do it, okay? And that's why Sam talked about creating a culture earlier on, having that shared culture of teaching and learning in your school where you know the names for the strategies. That some of you might use Teach Like a Champion by Doug Lamov and use his strategies. Some of you might use your own teaching and learning language, but being able to name it, recognise what it looks like, and then practice it and do it in your own setting is really, really important. So there are loads of different instructional coaching models out there and loads of varied approaches. This is the model that we have used at Iris for our coaching mechanisms because we really, really think it works. So what we're going to do, because of time, we haven't got enough time to look at all of them, we're going to look at these ones. Praise, probe, action step, and practice. So this is the see it and the name it aspect of this coaching model. Okay, we're going to have a look at what it looks like. So I have to say thank you so much to Dixon's who have put this video on YouTube that I have nicked. Something we're looking to work on in the next year or so, where a video platform obviously is to actually work with our multi-academy trusts and our schools to get some mentoring and coaching videos as good practice on there. So, you know, Layla, Sam Gibbs, I'm looking at you. So, you know, this can be your next project. So I'm going to show you this now, okay? So this teacher is about to do the praise, the probe, the action step, and the practice. And what I'm going to ask you is, what do you notice, okay?
You might get to do more than one in the time if you are speedy. You might spot Miss Shorten's challenge question in there. I might have been a little bit tricky for you this morning. You'll have to see if you can spot it. You'll need your mini whiteboard. Okay, I'm going to put 2 minutes on my timer. Show me you're smart and ready to go. Good. Love these tracking eyes, means we're getting a really purposeful transition. Is my whole team ready? Got that 100%? Good. Tell me, what's 3 times 5? 15. 3 times 5 is? 15. 5 times 4 is? 20. 5 times 4 is? 20. 2 minutes on my timer.
So I know in our last few coaching sessions we've been working on 100%. And I know last week we were looking at using proximity in particular to insist on that 100%. And it was great to see in your lesson the other day that you were using that, especially within your transitions. I noticed when they went from the bug rug to the tables, you moved across just to check, I think it was Lucas or somebody else, they were joining in. And not only were you using that strategy, but also your grad co was as well. It was great to see how she got up and she moved to the other side of the bug rug to make sure she was really lifeguarding and keeping all students focused on your input.
Yeah.
So following practicing that in our coaching session and then using it within the lesson, how did it feel to you?
Yeah, I think it just supports that pace. It keeps it really purposeful for things like transitions, and it keeps that positive tone up as well. I'm not stopping or being interrupted by having to address something. It just helps you to catch it early. That movement means that you're there. The student recognises that you're there to support them actually. It doesn't feel like calling them out, and it keeps that flow and that pace nice.
Oh, that's great. So, as you know, we've been working on 100%.
Yep.
I want us to really look in depth at the review now part of your lesson in particular. Can you tell me what is the purpose of the review now?
Sure. So it keeps students accountable for whatever they've done in their do now. They need to have their answer ready. They need to have been on task and working. And it's a quick, speedy data capture for me. Has everybody been on task? Are there any misconceptions or errors? Anything that I need to address then and there? Anybody who actually needs a bit more follow-up?
And it's great there that you've said about the data check. Do you think you were able to check all students within that?
Not quite, no. I think because we've not got it quite slick enough or not quite speedy enough, there's a couple often that I miss out on at the end because I'm trying to get round them all, but they're not there with us, so they're not quite ready yet, and it means I can't get to them in that same show me.
It's interesting that you noticed that because I picked up a few in the corner in particular that they just didn't quite keep up with the rest of the class during your show me. So it's great that you've been able to pick that out. Right, so it's time for the practice part now. Okay, so I'm going to get up first. I'm going to model narrating around a countdown. Okay, to get all of the students ready for show me with the boards. I want you to be really looking to see what am I doing with my body. How am I getting that 100% with my countdown?
Yep, okay.
Okay.
Yep, sure.
Okay. Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay, we are going to get ready for our show me now. In 5, 4, pens down in 3, boards hovering in 2, 1. Lucas, ready? Show me. Right, so what did you see then during that really speedy example then?
Yeah, so you've got, it's nice and snappy, it's really clipped, you're not doing any long garbled instructions, it's things like pens down, boards hovering, nice and clipped, and you're using those different different lifeguarding strategies. So instead of moving and using your proximity, you've got a nice disco finger in there, you know, checking for that in that scan.
And I know that there I'm just doing the table, but when you were doing the clash, you'd make it a little bit more overt with your using those BC looking strategies.
Yeah, sure. Right then. Do you want to come up and have a go? Sure.
Okay, so
I will sit down here.
oh, it's not letting me pause it, so we're watching all of it whether we want to or not. Oh, there you go. So what that then led to then is the practice. So that teacher was able to see it in that model, name it. So they used a lot of strategies from Doug Lamov's book. Disco finger is one of them that causes particular hilarity on Twitter. And then to do it. So she was going to do it herself then. And then obviously that out of context practice would then, because this is a new teacher, would help them develop that automaticity to be able to go into the classroom and do it properly then. Nobody's saying that out of context practice is the way that the only way we're going to improve teaching. As Andy said this morning, if we only give a teacher the opportunity to practice out of context, actually what we're going to get is routine expertise, not adaptive expertise. So as their domain expertise gets more fluid, they can then go into that classroom and do that in real time. So before we finish, I'm going to give you a chance now to watch a little bit of a lesson, okay, and have a go at role playing. Hang on. Role playing that praise and probe part of the coaching conversation, okay, the instructional coaching. So this is a maths lesson. I've used this guy's video probably 100 times in CPD, and I'm always in abject terror of arriving in a room and seeing him sat there, you know, in a school that I'm in. So, you know, I've been, as I said, in about 400 schools in the last 2.5 years and haven't come across him yet. So if any of you know him, please do apologise. This was 2012, so I have to say, were any of you teaching in 2012 here? Quite a few of you. This was the bad old days of differentiated learning objectives, worksheets. We're doing this because Ofsted want. That does terrify me that there's only 6 of us, I think, who were teaching in 2012 in this room. Now, if that's not an indication of where we are in the profession, I don't know what is. So do forgive this teacher, okay? What I'd like you to think about, I think in particular, is his modelling and his questioning, okay? And that's going to probably lead you into this praise, probe and action step part of the role play.
So by the end of the lesson, every single one of you will know what powers mean for whole number powers. You'll understand and use the laws of powers for multiplication and division, and you'll be able to use whole number powers and simple cases of the laws.
Told you about the learning
powers.
objective.
Sounds
Do you remember this? Like, yeah.
Genuinely means, can we solve those things there? Right, very quickly, what I want you to do, title, date, answer me those 8 questions that are down the bottom, just to kick us off.
Have we got any maths teachers in here? Yeah, you'll be going, oh God, at this, because every time I have maths teachers in the room, they're doing the same.
No, title, date, and just answer the questions. They're down here. A to G. So. About 90 seconds left.
He's done that teacher thing, hasn't he? 1.5 minutes and give you 30 seconds, yeah.
Right, very quickly, working our way along the front row. Can we have answers, please?
4 squared is 16.
12 squared is 144.
3 cubed is 27.
5 cubed is 125.
10 to the power of 4 is 10,000. 10,000.
How many noughts?
4.
How do you know how many noughts are on the end of it?
Because there's 10 to the power of 4.
Perfect, excellent answer.
I didn't go on to that one.
We'll do it now. 2 to the power of 5.
4, 16.
No pressure.
100. 500.
Help him out, Liam. Go on, set the pressure on.
Is it 10? No.
2 to the power of 5.
That's 2 times 5, sorry. 32.
Excellent, good. 2 to the power of 5 is 32. Perfect. Right.
Okay, I would absolutely love to show you the rest of this video, but I reckon that's enough, I think, for the coaching conversation. There is, I would say, check this out on YouTube. There's loads of lesson videos there, and we've got loads on Iris Connect, but this is just brilliant for this tiny, granular aspect of coaching. At the end of this video, I have to share it with you. It's absolutely hilarious. So there's a quite disengaged young man at the back of the room who doesn't get called upon at all during the lesson, and they're doing marking, and the teacher says, right, here are the answers, and they're all ticking through them, and this guy gets 2 in and then drops his pen and goes, is how I feel about maths, basically. And then the teacher goes, right, thumbs up if you've understood it, and he's the first guy to put his thumbs up, which is just like a classic example of why mini whiteboards are king and thumbs up don't work, you know. So I'm going to put the model back on the board for you, okay, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, okay. It's your turn now. You're going to have a go working in pairs if you can, role-playing this for a couple of minutes. One's the teacher, one's the coach. You're going to praise, so narrate the positive with precise praise about the lesson. Ask questions to unpick their thinking and discreetly access their mental models. And again, I've nicked this from Teach First because they do this so well, so credit to them if you're watching Teach First. And then probe, show them model of success, so show them how you do it instead, identify the key differences in the success criteria, and then state that single concrete highest leverage action step, and they might do it themselves, okay, in this conversation. Everyone clear what you're doing? Okay, so a couple of minutes role playing, and let's see how you found it. We're just finishing, Rico, don't worry, I'm bang on time, yes. Now, I want to be coached by loads of you, because I was walking around going, yeah, they're a great coach, they're probing, and how good is Sarah? Yeah, honestly. I'm interested to know what some of you picked up on. I mean, I gave you a bit of a stir by saying question and modelling before we watched it, but what, if you had to define kind of a concrete action step that coachee could construct themselves, or if not, with help and probing questions, they didn't get to that, what might we say is that one defining thing that actually they could do that's going to be the highest leverage, it's going to make the biggest difference to their teaching? What do you think it could be? And there might be different answers to this. That's the complexity of teaching, isn't it? So what do we say? Go on, Layla, I can see you about to say something.
Yeah, so one of the things we picked up on was if you were a student at the back of that class, yes, you just instantly were opting out, weren't you? Because so, you know, something around, you know, ensuring the engagement of all students in the class by cold calling,
yes,
using the cold call strategy. And I think in that concrete action step, using, I think it's Adam Boxer, isn't it, that talks about the power of why, so helpful and important in ensuring the why behind.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and when if you are constructing the action step for somebody that you are coaching, that how and why has got to be part of it. So it's kind of what, the how, the why. It's got to have that shared language in as well. Like I know that at what you use Teach Like a Champion, so cold calling is a term that will be completely familiar to all of your staff. I go to hundreds of schools, as I've mentioned several times, who haven't got a clue who Doug Lamov is or haven't heard the phrase cold calling before. So that's why it's contextual. It's got to be that culture that you build in your school to have that shared understanding of what those terms are called. I probably would have done the same, but also that idea of opting out. That young man didn't know the answer, God love him, and he went to the friend next to him, and then he didn't come back. He didn't ask the friend to articulate his understanding, or, you know, there was no probing questions. It was all very surface call and response, wasn't it, all the way through. So there was none of those stretch it questions that Doug Lamov talks about. So there could have been all sorts of things that you could have picked out there. But I hope what that's demonstrated is that if you have coached previously without a framework, just actually how useful this can be to use as a framework. And this is pretty much the framework that we use across all of our pathways, but articulated in different ways dependent on domain expertise. Is that to say that this framework has to be a script and the be all and end all? Of course not. So if during that conversation you then went off piste and talked about something else that was an underlying issue behind this teacher's block or challenges that they're facing, that's absolutely fine as well. But what we're saying is that, you know, coaching at its heart really it can be based on a framework, but it's got to have that adaptability. It's got to meet a teacher where they are, and that's what we've tried to do with the design of our pathways. So thanks so much for listening. That was a very whistle-stop tour. I would love to chat to you for longer, and if you do feel like you want to chat more over lunch, please do, in between me stuffing my face with whatever food they've got for us. But it's been a pleasure to work with you all, and thank you so much.